Okay, hi everyone. I shouldn't have clicked the link. Welcome again to our 29th Emerging Centers call. We'll be talking this month about metrics for RCD success. Just a really quick intro to the call. CARC is the Campus Research Computing Consortium, advancing the frontiers of research by improving the effectiveness of professionals, their career development, and visibility, and their ability to deliver services and resources for researchers. If you're just joining us, we're the Emerging Centers track, which is a community for organizations that are sort of developing and ongoing maintaining programs or centers. There's also the data facing, researcher facing, and systems facing, and a new strategy and policy facing. That's are each pointed at different areas. This is an ongoing sort of conference where you can see latest developments in each of these tracks as things go on. CARC also has a set of working and interest groups, are largely centered around career development, as well as I think the capabilities model for research computing and data has a really interesting research thrust of developing, what it takes to provide RCD services for an institution, as well as the RCD Nexus, which is another working group piece that's really sort of come to prominence as well in this past year. So you can check out more about the organization on carc.org. If you have questions, you can contact myself or Jane Combs about the Emerging Centers track. This month's call, we're focusing on, as I said, metrics for RCD success. We have a great set of panelists here. I want to introduce, let me stop sharing. I think we've got everybody and we got a great showing. Sorry, I just want to make sure I've got I'm following the right order of operations because I wasn't here for all of the planning for this. I think we were going to do our panelists first, and then we have a presentation from Buffalo on OpenXDMOD and Coldfront. Is that correct? Steering committee members, keep me on the right track.
I think Jane's note said it was the other way around.
Oh, it was the other way around? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll start with Dory Sidak from Buffalo, and then we'll move on to our panelists. All right. So Dory, I think you've got co-host, and you can go ahead and take it away.
All right, great. Can you see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay. All right, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Dory Sidak, and I'm one of the system administrators at the University at Buffalo Center for Computational Research. I'm the project manager for Coldfront. I'm not an XDMOD expert, so hopefully we'll do them proud, but there are a few team members on the call today, so they'll be available for questions if anyone has them. Let's see here. So I want to start out with talking a little bit about XDMOD, just so everyone understands the history and sort of why it was developed the way it was developed. So it's been in works for more than 11 years now. Initially started with an NSF grant to audit TeraGrid, which then became XSEED and now is Access. So they are funded for another 5 years to continue evolving the project and providing as much information about the usage of all of these, all of the cyber infrastructure that NSF funds. So when it first started, there was nothing. It started from scratch. NSF had some questions, which basically melted down to, are we getting our money's worth out of all of this that we're funding? And so initially, when we started looking at how could we answer some of these questions that they're asking, first of all, their questions were super general. So it was quite an interesting project start for the team. But most of the cyber infrastructure at the time was HPC compute based. So they started with using the data that was generated from jobs run on clusters. They took in data from all the different national centers and started providing NSF with information on the utilization. And as the graphs were provided and some questions were answered, NSF started asking more questions and it started getting more involved, and it evolved from there. Fortunately, the team also at the same time developed an open source version of XDMOD. So if you happen to have an allocation on Exceed, which is now going to be accessed, you would be able to log into XDMOD and get information depending on your role. But if you don't, and if you just want to run this software for your own center, you can download the open source version and install it and start getting usage information. One of the things that came out of this was I just recently went to a presentation yesterday by the PI of this project, and they were able to determine that not only is utilization important and for return on investment information, but if they were able to improve job and system performance on the Exceed resources, if they could do that, even just 1% increase, that translated to the ability for them to provide an additional over 100 million CPU hours annually, which equates to about $5 million in savings for NSF. 1% is like nothing. And obviously at the scale of the national cyber infrastructure that we see, it is a lot. But even if we were able to do this at our own centers, small, medium-sized centers, this is quite an improvement and a better return on your investment. So even just being able to utilize XDMOD for these types of things can help us. So some of the things, in case you're not familiar with XDMOD, some of the information you can get out of it, you can develop charts that show us, the number of jobs run on your systems, job sizes. Are you seeing a lot of small jobs, large jobs, mixture of the two? What are your wait times? You can break this down by different categories, like not only the overall usage, but also by campus units. So maybe we often present a breakdown of the decanal units, that the usage for each decanal unit at our university. We can tell what applications are most used on our systems. And then the couple of things that provide us more information to improve that usage that I just talked about. One are the application kernels. You can run these on demand, but we run them at UB every night. So it's a lightweight application that's run from the user's perspective. So you don't need extra permissions or elevated privileges. This is just going to be the same application run the same time every day, requesting the same resources. And so what you should see is consistent usage and performance. If you see anything different, then you're going to want to track down what that problem might be. So if you happen to see all of a sudden a drop in IO on your storage, that might point to something your sysadmins did. Maybe they did a software update on the storage, and now all of a sudden you're getting poor IO. Or maybe it points to something else. The Supreme module with XDMOD allows us to get job performance that's tied to what's also going on in your systems. So they use standard data collectors like PCP or Prometheus, and it allows us to see exactly what's going on the systems while the job is running. And that provides what we're calling a job efficiency rating. So your users can log into XDMOD and they get a user report card. And when they see that report card, it has a lot of red on it, it's not usually good. And they might start to say, okay, why is this showing my job efficiency is so poor? Like, I thought I was doing everything right. As they start investigating that and they improve whatever, maybe they're requesting 200 gigs of RAM and they're using 2, their job efficiency is going to be poor. They're going to realize, oh, I don't need to request that much RAM. And also if I don't request that much RAM, I'm probably not going to wait in the queue as long. So it helps them, it helps you, your usage and efficiency for your cluster improves, and all of that ends up, you know, improving your return on investment. I just wanted to show a couple of screenshots in case you're not familiar with XDMOD. This is an older one from the Exceed dashboard, but I wanted to point out that you don't have to log in to see this dashboard. So I'll put in the chat window when I'm done speaking the link to the Access one, but you can see all kinds of interesting information about what's going on our national cyber infrastructure. And then if you have an allocation to Access, you'll be able to log in and you can see different options depending on the role that you have on your allocation. But there is a lot of data. There's a lot of different ways you can slice and dice all of this data. One of the things, like I said, we like to do is we provide our VPR and president information about the overall CPU usage broken down by decanal unit. So they could always, this is probably a dream of mine and doesn't actually happen, but they could go back to the deans and say, hey, you need to contribute more to CCR because your group is using more. We also take a look at things like the number of jobs run on our different clusters. This is from last year, and we see kind of low usage of our industry cluster, which is a new cluster that we put in last year. And, you know, we definitely want to see this usage higher because it's a new investment. So we'll maybe go out and do a little bit more I guess, a road show to talk about our industry cluster and why people would want to use it. This I like to use when we're starting to look at purchasing new equipment. You might want to point out to your sysadmins when they're starting to spec out a new cluster. Should we be looking at really dense compute nodes for the new purchase? So something that might have 80 or more cores and fewer of them. They're probably going to be more expensive. If we look at our usage, this is from last year, I'm going to see that at a peak, the average core count per job was not even 20. So we could really save money and potentially purchase more compute if we went with the less dense, less expensive nodes. We don't need to go and buy something that's got a large core count on it because that's not what our users are asking for. This is a wait time graph. So we're looking at based on the wall time requested, what are our wait hours? So we were seeing a large spike in those requesting, you know, like more than a day. So that was back in February. We noticed that since the industry nodes were not being utilized heavily, we merged those nodes into our general compute cluster, allowing our faculty users to access those nodes when our industry customers were not using them. And this dropped wait times obviously significantly, 40 hours between when before that and when we merged those. So again, that's improving our return on investment on the industry nodes for now until we can get industry customers. I know I'm running out of time here, so I just quickly want to talk about Coldfront. There is some information we can't get out of XDMOD. XDMOD is all data-based, you know, metrics on the usage of our systems. But what our director wanted to know was what exactly our researchers were doing on our systems, not specifically how much usage, but what kind of projects were they working on? What is the field of science the research is based out of? So he would ask every year and very few people would actually answer his emails. So we created the annual project review, and that forces the PIs to go in and update their project information annually. It's not difficult. It takes less than 5 minutes because we definitely don't want to overburden them. But if they don't do the project review, then they can't renew their allocation for the system that they want to work on, the cluster or the storage. So they have to do it. the grant, we asked them for publication information and that they were able to generate by using our systems, and then any grant information they have, because even if CCR was not funded as part of one of their grants, we want to show our administration that our systems are being used to support funded research. So that's really important. There's no place at UB right now that has that information in one location. So at least for our users, we have that all in one place now. We have some visual aids that Coldfront supplies that are a little bit different than what XDMOD includes. And then we also have this idea of research output. So it isn't just a publication that you're generating with research. There might be something else, some other work product, maybe a software product that you've developed, a database. Maybe you were interviewed by the local news or you presented at a conference. None of that would be covered by the traditional publication and grant information that we collect. So we have this idea of research output, and it's we just allow our faculty to tell us more about what they've created. So these are just a couple of charts. The funding agency, as you hover over the different sections of the pie chart, gets highlighted, and this is all just tallied up for your version of Coldfront, whatever your PIs add into their projects, that will display for you. And we've got a publications chart, and that's basically it right now. We have some ideas. Coldfront is a lot newer than XDMOD, and we have some ideas on how we can improve this. I see a lot of emails going around about, you know, what are good ways to capture return on investment. And so as we get some other ideas and suggestions, we'll be looking to incorporate those into Coldfront as well. Thank you.
All right. Any questions for Dory before we move on to our panel?
I have a quick one. Dory, so is this linked up? So I'm a faculty member and I have like 4 or 5 systems I have to put CVs in and all this kind of stuff. Is Coldfront linked up to the faculty activity system like we use digital measures? I don't think they change it every week. But also, is there a way to get from the faculty reporting system back into Coldfront information?
So I'm not familiar with that type of a faculty reporting system. We are currently testing an ORCID link, so that will at least allow you to link your ORCID ID and get any publication and grant information that you've got in there over to Coldfront. But I'm not familiar with any faculty kind of reporting systems, so we'd like to hear about that some more.
Yeah, I'm sure you have one. It's interesting that you don't know what it is.
Probably.
Thanks.
Well, the ORCID stuff would be great in that regard because you have to do that for research.gov now anyway for all grant applications. So that would be huge.
Okay, any other questions for Dory? Okay, great. Thanks again, Dory. All right, so we're going to move on to our panel. Set of center leaders who are going to talk about what they believe are the most important items to collect and share with stakeholders. And I'm going to call on Rudy Eigenman to go because you're at the top of my Zoom list. So if you'd like to go ahead and start sharing and walk us through what you've got.
You see those slides, or is it the wrong view?
Now I'm seeing the right view.
Okay, all right.
Looking good.
Okay, so I didn't quite know what to expect. So I was thinking about how do I argue for return on investment if I have to talk to our, for example, campus administrators. I'm on the academic side here. I'm currently chairing the computer science department. Also, my main appointment, if I'm not chair of the computer science, is in electrical computer engineering at U Delaware. I also, have some scars from being a program manager at NSF at OAC. That was 13 through 17. And some of my biases really stem from there. I have 3 slides that I have put some thoughts together. What is really the evidence I use when trying to convince administrators to make HPC, so high performance computing and data investments? One paper I often refer to is the Apon-Ahold paper published back in 2010 in the Journal of IT Impact. The data they collected was institutions that invest in HPCD, and they looked primarily at the top 500 list. And then they also looked at the change in ranking of these universities. And they concluded that institutions that invest in HPCD tend to go up in ranking. Now, one caveat here, the causal relationship is not clear, right? So keep that in mind. So it could be, the ranking leading HPC investment or the other way around. But I guess it's plausible that if you invest in HPC, then maybe that has an impact on ranking. Another paper I often cite is the Ozevsky et al. Papers. It was in Cluster Computing 2015. They look at citation counts of papers referring to computational sources. And of course, at other papers that are not based on computational resources, and they found that science papers based on HPCD use have higher impact. So that was a strong argument, and I always think it's a very strong argument to present to our administrators and say, look, if you make investments in high performance computing and data infrastructure, this really leads to high impact publications. And the third paper it wasn't a paper, it was a study by XDMOD CSS. They estimated, so they asked the domain sciences that they support, is in your subjective estimate, how long would the task that exceeds ECSS helped you do have taken you without ECSS help? And it was almost phenomenal, the ratio they came up with when they then compared these numbers with the actual month's investments of an ECSS staffer. It was a 4-fold value. So, the same work would have taken a domain scientist 4 times longer. It was subjective, clearly a caveat there, but it was a very interesting result. And I think presenting that internally at NSF has actually made a difference, I believe, in renewing XSEED. I was present when that renewal from XSEED 1 to XSEED 2 happened. It's by far not enough to have these 3 studies. We need to continuously update similar studies. But I think it's a great starting point and a great reference. Something that we also need to keep in mind, it helps, it's not enough to just show that impact or that data. It helps to have believers among the administrators. I can just show you 2 examples. Cybersecurity is not directly HPC, but related. We have here at the University of Delaware, we had a great cybersecurity initiative. Then the administration changed, and we had to constantly end up arguing, why is this necessary? Why is this necessary? And we argued and argued and argued, and at the end, it was canceled, the initiative. It was simply, I don't think our evidence has changed. It was a different set of beliefs in the administration. Example more on the positive side, there's a university who I will not name, and you may know that university or may know such a university where the former head of IT became the CIO and eventually the president. And clearly that university made great strides in HPC investments and also in the impact that came with it. So clearly there was a believer at the very top. And having that there was very important. What does that mean for us? Get involved in the search process, right? Try to say, look, our IT folks or faculty in this field, we really need to be involved in the search processes of these administrators as well. And my last slide, you need to also convince your colleagues in domain sciences. It's not enough to just say, look, what we do in IT is so great. It has all this impact. Because the biologists, the chemists, the physicists, they have very strong arguments as well. They go to the administration and say, we need the research dollars. We need dollars for our research instruments, such as microscopes. So we, the IT folks, we need to convince these faculty that it's in their interests to have high-performance computing and data investments. That is very, very important. How can we convince them? Well, the XDMOD analysis that I cited, you know, the fourfold return, remember, I think is a very good argument. It again helps to find faculty believers, just as it is true for administrators. Some faculty tend to believe in infrastructure. Others are pure scientists, so to speak. They say, look, all I want my dollars for is my core science. Maybe the NSF model helps. You may know that NSF, even infrastructure proposals get evaluated primarily with intellectual merit. So arguing for the intellectual merit of IT infrastructure is always a good thing to do. So these are a few thoughts on how do we convince our administration to make IT investments.
Okay, great. I think what we'll do is we'll let everybody get through their material and then we can sort of have a free for all in terms of questions, if that works. All right. So I think, Dan, would you like to present?
Sure, thanks, Rich. I think you need to enable screen sharing for me.
Yeah, I'm trying to find you in the participant list. There we go. Okay.
I probably exist.
You probably exist.
Yeah, I mean, I at least virtually exist in this context. So.
Okay, you should be able to present now.
There we go. Slides good.
Looking good.
All right, thank you. And thanks for the invitation. Good to be here and see you all. And thanks, Rudy, for those great comments, which I wholeheartedly agree with most all of. And went out from the first talk, we do the supreme part of XDMOD, so big believer in that stuff too. And we're continuing our participation through Access in that project and adding a network monitoring component too, I think, over time. So sometime in those next 5 years. So, but I thought I'd give you some of our perspectives, granting that we're in some ways a special case, but having, you know, now that I've been doing this for 25 years and through several different centers, I think there are some lessons learned here and there. So you all know who we are, right? I've stopped putting up bullets about TAC. I just showed pictures of stuff. So we run a couple of the big NSF systems, right? Stampede and the XDMOD Access side of things with its 6,000 nodes. We run Frontera, which is the leadership machine, and designing the machine for the new leadership class computing facility, which will be known as Horizon. So in the next couple of years, and you know, a bunch of other ones and archive systems as well. So so when I get into an ROI discussion, and I will admit I've never given one of my direct bosses an actual ROI number. I think the question is, who are your metrics for, and what are you actually trying to change, right? And if the answer is get more funding, which is almost always the answer, you may want to be cautious about how you use some of the more technical metrics that we do use for reporting to, say, NSF, or internally among your team to figure out how you're doing. So let me pick on a couple of them to just point out why this is hard, right? And so, and in the age of ORCID and Coldfront, we're finally getting better about this and automated citation counts, but counting citations is almost impossible. And even when you do, there's questions about the value of just raw citation counts, right? I know there was a recent paper that said in the best case, like using proper DOIs to reference data sets happens in 1 to 2% of cases and does not happen in 98 to 99% of cases. So you're looking at a 50 to 1 undercount in anything you do there. Just recently for a panel who said, how many times has the Frontera marker paper been cited? I'm like, well, you can look it up in, IEEE, or you can look it up in Google Scholar, and you get 2 different answers that are different by about a factor of 2. Or we went through and did a little hand analysis of every time Frontera was mentioned as in paper, the actual machine, and we found 1100. So you can be off by a factor of 2, you can be off by 2 orders of magnitude, a number that you can't get to that level of precision. What's the value, right? And that, is it useful information, right? So, and not all citations are the same, right? So a lot of those papers don't have much impact. Faculty are experts at pumping up citation counts and publication counts in their activity reports. And so deans, et cetera, are overwhelmed with, yeah, you have 50 papers, but you still suck, is a fairly regular thing, right? So, because none of those papers matter. So how do you mix those in, the good papers, and come up with a metric that matters? So funding is slightly less problematic in that everyone knows what a dollar is, and everybody cares about dollars, and they're easy to count. How many dollars are in. They're also sort of harder to attribute, right? So I have a data set that I almost never use. This is the first time I've actually mentioned it publicly, that shows that a little more than 30% of funding at all of the 15 UT campuses in Texas goes to TAC users, right? But we also have most of the serious computational resources are TAC users, right? So, and UT Austin is the largest recipient of NSF funding. 70% of that is because of TAC, but and I can point to that, but I could use that number with my bosses, but would it drop to 0 if TAC didn't exist? I mean, obviously I'm a big TAC proponent and I don't believe that, right? So I think it would drop some, maybe, because there is sort of long-term evidence, at least to me, that having great centers on your campus helps you attract quality computational faculty. And like going back to the 5-year life of Stampede 1 that we retired a few years ago, the 4 biggest user institutions, and this has been consistent, are Illinois, CMU, USCSD, and UT Austin. And occasionally UT Austin was not number 1, despite our local allocations on it. So is that a coincidence, or does that happen to be where NCSA, SDSC, and PSC have sat for the last 35 years that have affected the quality of computational people and their ability to use things at scale over time? That those institutions that overlap with centers that have centers on campus that aren't us are still our biggest users, right? It just shows that there is an effect on the campus, but it's a long-term effect. So, but whenever you have funding, you have to ask the question, are we responsible for those grants or are we incidental to them, right? So, so I'm always cautious about using these as just sort of a straight up story. So, but you do have to say something. And so to keep my time short, just 2 more slides. So first of all, let me acknowledge that we have unfair advantages here, right? So we have directly brought in hundreds of millions in grants, right? I show over $1 billion on my CV. So, and that helps. But I've always argued, and I did this in our HPC Leadership Academy that we had with Microsoft and some others last week, that you don't have to win a lot of grants to make that part of your value proposition, right? There is, the first thing you want to do, I think, in arguing ROI or just value to your administrators is to say that, you are not an IT service, you are a part of the research enterprise, right? And I think getting that across is the #1 thing you do, right? So the bottom bullets there, right? Everybody looks at IT today as a cost to be minimized. If you're a president or a vice president or a provost, right? That's just how you see it. And if you want evidence of that, if you track university org charts, and I do occasional consulting at other universities on just sort of the structure, and many CIOs, maybe half, have been moved to report to CFOs at big universities, right? They don't report to the president, they don't report to the provost, they report to the chief financial officer, because they're not seen as adding intellectual value. They're seen as this huge cost that we're trying to control, right? And nothing else. As soon as you win any grants, you can argue that you are not part of that anymore, right? If you bring in external funds, right? You are part of research. You are viewed by the faculty. Rudy mentioned selling this to the science domain people, right? If they see you as a PI on things as well, then you're more of a peer than a service to them, which is how you want to be viewed. So you want to get yourself out of the IT as a cost to research instruments or an investment, right? So, and you want to be looked at as research instrumentation. So when I talk about ROI, I tend to stray from the metrics, and I've never given a number, but I take sort of a more holistic view of what we do on campus. And this is through 3 campuses now. I've done this. So mixed metrics with anecdotes of success. I think, I do give uptime and job numbers somewhere in there, but it's not what I hang my hat on when I talk to my boss, because frankly, my boss doesn't care about that stuff. So, and remember that not all users are created equal. The smartest advice I ever got from a dean I used to work for, a dean of engineering 20-something years ago, was when I was going in and I said, hey, by the way, you may get a complaint email from this particular faculty member. And he said to me, oh, that's okay. I don't read email from that guy. He sends complaint emails about stuff every week. I started deleting him 2 years ago. I've never read his email. So I'm like, well, that's interesting to note. Can you tell me whose email you do read? And he's like, you make these 10 faculty happy, I'm happy. Because they bring in 80% of the money to the college. And the other 200, meh, whatever. I'm like, well, this is useful information for me because there's one of me and I can keep up with 10 people and probably not 200, right? So this was way pre-TAC days, but learn who the stars are. And this takes us to the next bullet. Whoever you're talking to, whether it's the VPR, the Dean of Engineering, the CIO, what do they care about, right? Figure out what they care about. What do they want to know from you, right? It is probably not job numbers and utilization rates or papers necessarily, right? So, we send one set of things to the system office. I send one set of things to my boss, the VPR. I send a totally different set of things to NSF because they don't care about the same things, right? NSF does want to see papers and utilization rates and stuff like that, but even that's not the whole story. You'll never completely win if that's all you give them. So, so figure out what they care about, talk about that. It is probably not the technical measures that we care about that say we're doing a good job. You just have to convince them you're doing a good job. You mostly need that to manage your center as much as anything. I always try and give them metrics in context because I don't ever actually believe the numbers, even when I'm giving them. So like a good computational scientist, right? I'm not completely bought in on my own Kool-Aid. So for funding, I put our direct funding as the lower bound. I put all that external funding that the PIs have as the upper bound. And I always say somewhere between these two extremes is the truth. But neither one of them is the truth, right? So, because it's more than we bring in, but it's less than all of our users bring in because they'd find in other ways. So, do you map to the big initiatives on campus, right? The stuff the president talks about, the stuff in your strategic plan, right? Listen to them talk. What do they care about? How do you map to that, right? If you have 60, saying you have 800 users, as I put in here, that includes 6 of the top 10 PIs on campus is a much better story than just saying you have 800 users, who are unfunded grad students, calculating 0 to more digits or something. So, which was the definition of LIGO computing for a bunch of years. So, figure out the significant things that those users do, right? A paper in Science and Nature is worth a lot more than saying we had 600 papers and conferences you haven't heard of, right? So, I always mix science achievements in with the metrics when I do that. So, with that, I'll stop there. I'm sure I used all my time and then some. So, and find the stop share button. There we go.
All right. Thanks, Dan. That was great. Very enlightening. I think next up, Preston, you're going to be representing Purdue.
Yep.
All right.
See if I can share my screen here. Okay. Everybody see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the right view? Okay, very good. So yeah, I'm glad I decided to skip a lot of the content that Rudy and Dan addressed. So this will fortunately be something a little bit different. I'm basically sharing a retrospective of Rcd metrics that we have used institutionally. Many of these were ones that were shared by various CIOs over the years to the board, dating back to 2004 or so. Yeah, so our guiding principles on these sorts of things, and I think Dan alluded to this on his final slide there. When you're communicating your value, you need to tailor these messages to which stakeholders are you communicating value to, and what's important to them, or in our case, at these board metrics at the institution at that point of time. So the earliest metric that we had, this was from 2004. So this was when Jim Bottom, who I think many of us know was the first CIO here at Purdue. Jim was brought in. One of his early directions was our research computing has not been invested in for a number of years, so we really need to build this up. So you can see that first year we had very small amounts of capacity on campus and very high dollars of cost. And over a couple of years, he was able to show the board that we were bringing down the cost for the cycles that we provide to the university and increasing the volume. So that was good in the first couple of years of having a CIO. And then after a number of years, Jim's tenure lasted until about 2006, and Jerry McCartney came in was CIO for another 12 years. And this was a busy slide that showed lots of different things, but this was one of those speeds and feeds things. How many users do you have? How many hours have you burned on what type of system? Which I think the message to me this is you're showing that we made an investment and people are actually using it, which is a great first set of metrics if you don't have anything else to say. And we were able to show how our capacity on storage and HPC and grid computing at the time had increased from those very early years. After that, we start getting into some more quality of life metrics. The board and the university administrators have started to accept that high performance computing is important. That message had been internalized for quite a while. And we're showing them that our increased investment here in the 2008 to 2012 timeframe has resulted in quality of life improvements. So rather than waiting hours upon hours to get their science to start, the more capacity and the more capability we get, the scientists are able to get their jobs running even faster. Dan talked about your CIOs reporting under the CFO. Well, Purdue's CIO has reported to the CFO a couple of different times. They reported to the CFO, then to the president, and is now back under the CFO. Cost effectiveness was really important a number of years ago, and this was probably around 2009 or so. And the board was asking questions about like, well, why don't we just use the cloud? We should use Amazon for all of our HPC. Well, so we made some numbers just to reinforce that our HPC investment is the most cost-effective way of doing it at that period of time. And even comparing, we compare relatively well to large-scale university resources. So we felt that we had a strong case as to doing the way we were doing it was in the best interest of the institution. I think Dan kind of talked about a metric kind of like this as well. How many of your users are among the top researchers at the institution? So we started doing this metric dating back into 2008. We're showing how many of the grant dollars that are coming to the university are coming to the people who are high performance computing users. Relatively, a quarter of the dollars being HPC users is pretty good in those early years. And we kept this metric up for a long period of time. All the way up into 2012, where it would continue to go up, showing awards, and then we updated a couple of years later to show expenditures, how much of the money gets spent at the university. Where we here in 2022, 60, I think it was 66% of the sponsored research expenditures at Purdue were by users of the high performance computing resources at Purdue, which I think is a good strong number. Overall tracking the trends, how has this grown over time? The graphs like this were really interesting to show the board those trends over time. $350 million of awards, and the trailing a year or so behind the expenditures here in 2022. The way the finances work at Purdue, the F&A always comes in and gets put into one magic bucket and becomes part of the general fund. So showing how much F&A is brought in by our HPC users has been important to show that up to our CIO's boss, the CFO. I think it was something like 79% of the F&A was by HPC users this last year as well. Our current president, who's winding down his tenure, has been a big advocate for student learning over his 10, 11-year tenure. So we've started using student-focused metrics for the last several years, tracking the number of degrees that have been awarded to users who have run jobs on our research systems. over time. So you can see the growth there in the mid 2000s, breaking it out by degree level. It was real interesting seeing how master's degree students for a number of years were the biggest users. Now the PhD students are a sizable proportion, which is pretty interesting. The table there to the right shows the survey of earned doctorates number that gets collected by the NSF, and the number of those graduate students who use HPC. It's a pretty high percentage, 29% a couple of years ago. We haven't got our 22 numbers, but it'll be interesting to see what trend that takes, and how these curves have been adjusted here in 22 and 21 with COVID. And then I think, there's one. Yeah, I think the final slide here. This is my example on reporting to the CFO. We had several CIOs over the last couple of years who reported to the CFO. A couple CFOs ago was very, very skeptical of high performance computing investment. We spend tremendous amounts of money on HPC. Why are we even doing it? Who even uses this stuff? So we spent a lot of time framing the value message to the CFO in the type of terms that really spoke to them. So one of our CIOs in that time was, God bless him, was actually kind of helpful with doing that. But we were able to show that with about $5 million of general funds supporting this, enabled $345 million of new grant awards, which when you frame that in the terms of the CFO, that's a 66x ROI CFO. And the story I was told when the CIO relayed that message, he said, "Oh, okay, that's pretty good," and then never ever brought it up again. So we haven't had to push these numbers quite as strongly over the last couple of years, but we do keep those updated as a tool just in case the financial part of the institution is interested in probing into that further. That I believe is the end of mine here. I let Rich guide us for the rest of our time.
All right, thanks very much, Preston. Do we have questions for our panelists? If you want to use the hand icon or just speak up, I think they'd be happy to answer your questions. Go ahead, Dory.
I actually had a question for Preston. It's interesting that you showed the diagram of the degrees awarded. That is one of the things that we were considering capturing in Coldfront. So I was wondering how you're collecting that information.
Well, I get a dump of usernames that ran a job out of XDMOD, and then I ask our Office of Institutional Research very nicely if they will feed those in and give me a dump of degrees that were awarded to that list of students.
That I guess I'll jump. So Preston, that was a fantastic slide to follow up on that. And that's what, again, I'm a faculty member and I teach. I have 140 bioinformatics students right now, and they're all using our HPC system. And this is like one thing it's really difficult for me to articulate. I can have a hard time talking to anybody actually above my pay grade, but the workforce development part of this is critical, especially I'm looking at it from a biology perspective, biotech perspective. Learning how to use this stuff. These are skills that if they don't have them, they're going to have to get trained or not get the job at all, to be able to do this stuff. And so everything is sort of focused on research expenditure. I get that, but there's much more money coming in from tuition dollars and why the students are coming to the university in the first place. And so I'm so glad you showed that and that you're reporting that at Purdue, that to people how important that is. This is workforce development. These are basic skills for biologists now. That's just one domain.
Well, and this might be a good hook to advancement and the alumni development folks is to actually survey folks of, did you use HPC in your time here, and how's it affected your career, and your paycheck? Yeah,
I resisted adding more slides because I didn't want to have the Excel chart of doom presentation here, but we do have a metric that we share with the provost office every year. We have a cluster that's dedicated to instructional use. The instructors can enroll their class on it, and it takes care of all the magic of getting them on and off throughout the semester. We share that with them semester by semester, how many courses that use that. And I think there was something like 94 classes that use that this last semester, which is music to the vice provost for teaching and learning's ears, getting that chart every year.
So great presentation to all. I have a question that's to a number of you. It sort of follows up on what one of Dan's comments, but I've talked to a couple of people who run big centers and also had the sense that when we were doing impact reporting at Berkeley, one of the most impactful things were what we call golden quotes. And, basically the quotes from those people who would say things like, I'm a computational chemist, you guys are my lab, without you, I can't do research, and those things we were told in many cases, those were as impactful as any number we could come up with. And I wondered if you guys could comment on that.
One comment, I mentioned the sort of the XDMOD analysis of looking for, what's the equivalent, what time would it have taken domain scientists to do the job that their IT support folks have done. As part of that analysis, there were many answers, or at least several, that says we couldn't simply have done that job, right? And that was actually very important evidence, at least internally at NSF as well. So I fully agree with what you were mentioning.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's the sort of anecdote thing, right? I don't do a science highlight without a quote from somebody on the project when I present those, because they are, not only having the great quotes, which is awesome. I share them a ton with our staff and staff meetings, because I think that's the best place to do it, is to keep morale up. But again, pick, when you're going to present evidence from a user, make sure it's a user whatever administrator has heard of. And not somebody who they've never met, who's a small player, right? So you just have to be careful about that, or do a balanced portfolio of them. I try and pick, small size, large size. I will say the number one thing when we get to like the National Science Board level, we get pushed on, with the, cloud cost avoided has become a big metric, but is capability, right? What did we do that they couldn't have done anywhere else is a question I get a ton, right? So, so I now keep handy how many jobs on Frontera ran on more than 30,000 cores, right? More than could run on a typical campus cluster. Because that's, and what fraction of our usage goes to that, because that, enabling capability is key, right? Because a lot of people will say, well, they could do this, but yeah, if we put a 64 node cluster in their lab, they'd probably muddle through. But there's somewhere that's not true, and you really want to capture that. And getting in those quotes, the differentiation your staff provides, not just the machine, I think is also huge.
Yeah, and I agree to your comment, Patrick. We had a faculty member, computational chemist, that made the National Academies of Science, and he mentioned offhand in front of our CIO, I never could have gotten to the National Academy if it hadn't been for the campus computing. So of course that immediately got turned into a poster that was hung up around campus, with his face and with his quote. So that thing is totally one of those faculty members that the administration does know, and they do want to hear what he has to say.
Does anyone have any internal metrics that they use to sort of judge where they're at, or set for aspirational goals of when you've hit those? Anything that you keep an eye on that you might not publish, but think about?
One that we used a lot, because we were pushing really hard on the idea. Some people have heard me do the rant before that, demographic diversity can come if you focus on domain diversity in your support. And so we would track the domains of all the researchers and produce our own metric of how well are we supporting every single domain across campus, and how much time are we taking, how much resources are they using, and the impact. We could show again and again, a little bit of time and a little bit of compute could transform a humanities or social science research workflow.
Yeah. I think one that we use internally is, at this point, we just track the NSF award database, as I mentioned, for every award that happens in Texas every month. and then map them to our users to figure out what are we missing. And I don't actually share that outside. That's strictly for internal targeting. Is there somebody getting a big AI grant that we don't actually know? Seldom happens, but it does, So I just go through the list of titles and say, well, these 7 are ours. Are they users? Yes. These 5 are clearly either experimental or something that doesn't have a big computational component, and they're not our users, and that's fine. So I spend 10 minutes on it once a month, but yeah.
Okay, we're just about the end of our time. Just wanted to say thank you very much to our panel. We really appreciate you coming and presenting. I think this has been a really interesting one for our track. I think this is really central to a lot of folks who are just sort of getting their enterprises off the ground. So we really appreciate that. For folks who come to our track, we are always looking for new topics. If you have an idea for a topic, you can either note it down in the call doc or email Jane or I, or otherwise get in contact with us. We're always on the lookout for the next topic. So we really appreciate it. Once again, thank you to our panelists. Thanks, Dory. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.